so let's do this here. Making sure everything is running properly. Okay. Welcome to my studio, everybody. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to tackle one of the most famous paintings ever created in human history, Johannes Vermeer's The Girl with a Pearl Earring. Or is it A Girl with the Pearl? It's something along there. It was in Dutch to begin with, so whatever translation I come up with is probably going to be wrong thing. Okay, so before I even get started, I just want to mention right off the top that the techniques we're going to be learning today, the main one of which is called glazing with acrylic paints, is a technique that can take weeks and weeks to make a painting like Vermeer did. So we're not going to make a painting exactly the way he did it, and we're certainly not going to spend like 60 hours working on this painting. We're going to try to get this painting done as much as possible within the next 2.5 hours or so. So just as a little bit of a heads up, we're going to learn a new technique, and we're going to do the best we can with the technique considering our time constraints and also the level of painting we're at right now. So if you're hoping to get an exact reproduction of this painting done in a couple of hours, you might want to temper your expectations a little bit. Okay, so the first thing I want to show right off the bat is some stuff on the web, because I want to show you. Here's our Facebook page that it's a private Facebook page just for people who are taking these classes or who have taken the class in the past. And you can see here's the most recent post for the class, and then in here is artwork that you guys are working on, and these look cool. And here's the most recent paintings from the class we did just last week, the Anne Savage painting. Oh, cool. And so you can scroll through here. Those of you that are part of the class already know all about this, of course, but there are, every time I teach these classes, usually about 50% of the people watching are people who've maybe never even seen my face before. So that's why I tend to repeat myself a little bit at the beginning here. Also, you'll find in the video description below, along with the link to that private Facebook page, is a Dropbox link. And in the Dropbox, you'll see that there's all the videos that we've done so far. And if we click on the Vermeer here, you'll see a few things. There's going to be the original image, and then there's two different drawings you can print out in JPEG or PDF form. So really there's only 3 documents, just a couple of them are in PDF or JPEG. And so here's the original image, and then we have a tracing version of that image, which I've traced. And you can print it out and use it for coloring purposes if you want. And if you got little kids who can color along with you. And then here's another version of it, which I've printed off both of them, and I'm going to show you how I'll use both of them in today's episode. So that might be handy for anybody who wants to get your printer warmed up. I'm also going to show a couple of ways to mix color. I think I did this way back at the beginning of the course, but I want to do a little bit of a refresher of how to find specific colors using some of the free tools. These are websites that are up on the web, so I'll show you how to do this. The links to these are in the video description as well. So let's talk really briefly about Vermeer and his briefly his life. So 1632, 1675. So that makes him what, 43 years old when he died, which is pretty close to where I am right now. So knock on wood, hope that I outlive Vermeer. Vermeer was born in Holland and lived and died there. I don't even think he traveled outside of the country throughout his entire life, just like his peer Rembrandt, who I think they lived around the same time. They probably knew of one another, although Rembrandt was far more successful than Vermeer, although both of them sort of ended up having kind of tragic lives in the sense that they both died in relative poverty and in debt. So even though Rembrandt was way more successful, Vermeer was successful to, like, I think he had like kind of a working business of making art, but there were many other artists who were far more successful, again, Rembrandt being one of them, so much so that after Vermeer died, he basically disappeared into obscurity and was forgotten about, wasn't really written about in subsequent books kind of surveying the era that he was painting in. And it wasn't really until the past maybe 100 years or so where he really started to grow in popularity, and then I'd say maybe in the past 50 years has subsequently become one of the sort of acknowledged as one of the great painters of all time. So I think that's just kind of interesting right off the top to think about, is how the ideas of what taste are and who's a great artist or a bad artist change over the course of time for various different reasons that we could talk about. Let me see. You can read all of this stuff here. What do I want to focus on? Let's just take a look at his artworks, because one of the interesting things about Vermeer is that there's only 34 paintings of his that are universally acknowledged as his paintings, right? And we think of like 34 paintings for one artist is not a lot. That puts him, you know, especially being as well known as he is, and I think that's probably contributed to why he kind of dipped in recognition for a while, because it's not like there were the streets were flooded in Vermeer paintings and he was impossible to ignore. When you've only got 34 paintings and some of those paintings are scattered around, remember this is 500 years before the internet, so it's not like people can just click on a website and like, oh, here's a bunch of the paintings, right? If your painting is sold to a king in a different country, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, that painting is basically just disappeared from the public consciousness of in the area you live in. Like, people like, oh, I think there is a painting way off the horizon there that he did, but no one's ever seen it around here, right? So it wasn't until relatively recently where people were able to travel and we get a kind of a little bit more global context of how he fit into things. So here's some of his earlier paintings, and they're kind of biblical, allegorical scenes. And then he starts kind of around this time, which, 1657, how old was he around there? So in his late 20s, mid-20s, he kind of finds this particular format for his artwork, which is these interior scenes, usually featuring just one or two people, and it's believed that he made all of these paintings in the same interior space, his studio / living space. And, you know, I think the little street here, which is at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, is, I think this is the last painting he did that is actually outside. Oh, there is a couple more. Okay, never mind. As we go down here, some of them are obviously more well known than others, until we get to the girl with the pearl earring, which I believe, you know, is towards the end of his career here. Let's see, there's what, another 10 of them afterwards. And one of the qualities of these paintings is they all have what many people would consider as a kind of photographic look, right? That they look like a snapshot of somebody going about their business inside of a space, like somebody playing guitar, somebody playing piano, and then sometimes they're actually looking at the painter or the Vermeer, so they're actually acknowledging not only the artist but us as viewers looking at them. Just as somebody might, you know, you have your kids and they're playing piano and you're like, hey, cheese, smile, right, and take a quick photograph. His paintings have a kind of quality like that, where they seem kind of spontaneous. As you'll see here, there's a number of paintings which are disputed by him or by curators and historians. This one looks pretty close to being by one of him. This seems a little suspicious. I'd be surprised if that was really by him. It just looks kind of odd. And this would be from one of his earliest paintings. It's possible, but it also looks very different than a lot of the work he did. Maybe it's one of those paintings from art school. I just see in the comment there, May says, I've done 40 paintings just in this class already. So already, you know, we're at class number 40 here. We've already made more paintings than Vermeer did, or at least the ones that survive. As I said, he could have made another 100 of them, but they've all disappeared, been destroyed, because that happens, fires and wars and such, or they've been lost. You know, World War II, there was a lot of paintings got lost in World War II, and maybe they're in mine shafts somewhere stored by Nazis and Soviets and Americans, who knows. They've been looted and hiding in people's basements, you know, just for, you know, because they don't want to let anybody know, because then somebody will come and take them. So anyway, let's kind of continue here. Here's the, if you Google Vermeer, and then the painting itself. So we'll talk about the little bit of the history of this painting as we go. It is worth noting that, of course, there was a film made in 2003 called The Girl with a Pearl Earring, starring Scarlett Johansson. And I was, just as I was getting ready, I'm like, oh, I was going to watch that movie last night. Again, I saw it, what, almost 20 years ago now, but it's, you know, it's a little bit misty in the fog of my mind. So maybe if anyone's seen it recently, you could remind us whether it was a good film or not. I remember it being pretty good. I'm always, it's a funny thing when you watch movies, as an artist, when you watch movies about artists, sometimes they're full of cliches of who artists are, and sometimes those cliches are spot on, by the way, and some of them are just like so outrageous and ridiculous. Anyway, I think it's great that I would say that this painting, or this film, certainly catapulted the painting to even greater heights, right? I think Vermeer probably wasn't a name on the tip of most people's lips until this movie came out, and then obviously hundreds of millions of people who have seen the film now have a much greater idea who this artist is. Okay, so let's dive right into this, because I want to do a couple of things. So the first thing that maybe is worth mentioning is a couple of the materials that we may use today and explore. So we're gonna do some glazing, and you can do glazing with just water, adding water to your paint. So you do not need any extra materials if you don't have them, or you don't want to spend the extra money. You don't need them, but they do help, and they're manufactured specifically for what we're doing today. So having a glazing medium would help. It might be fun to play around with. You can use the slow dry medium or retarder. That it has similar properties. We'll talk about some of the differences as we go. And right off the top, I'm going to use some Mod Podge to adhere a painting to the surface here. So let's get right into it. So I've got a couple of canvases. I'm gonna show you two slightly different techniques here, and let's get actually some of these. Get all my bag of tricks out of here. My paints, my paint brushes. rags and sanding block here. So I'm just going to give these a quick little sand. Okay. So, the first thing, what I'm going to do is I am going to transfer this image onto the canvas here. Or, well, I'm just going to collage it on here. Now, we did this with the Hokusai painting a couple of sessions ago. So I'm just going to do the very similar kind of thing. And just with a pair of scissors. Now, with the Hokusai, we just glued the painting directly on there. We didn't cut it out at all. I am going to just experiment just cutting this picture off of the surface here, cutting along the lines. I don't have to be perfect. The only reason why I'm doing this, and we'll see if this is a good idea or a bad idea as we go here, is I didn't like having a little border around the edge. And because this painting features like a really, really dark background, like a solid black, I feel like we might be able to get away with having this line right up against the face here. So we'll see if this, again, is a bad idea or not. And so I'm going to glue this on, and then I'm going to do a tracing transfer onto the other canvas. So we'll have two of them set up, and we can kind of, because this will take a little bit of time for it to dry. Okay. One thing with this painting is Vermeer actually, the original painting, there's quite a lot of empty dark space up around the top and side. And I've kind of enlarged the painting a little bit just to make it kind of, the portrait of this woman sit a little closer to the center. If you wanted, you could certainly really kind of put her a little bit further down here if you like, but we'll kind of have her up a little bit closer there. Okay, so usually I have some newsprint right around here, and I don't today because I wasn't forward thinking enough, but let's just go right into this. Okay, so I'm going to take some of the Mod Podge and brush it over the canvas. So, okay, I'm gonna get this. You know, these cheap brushes, you know, start falling apart and little hairs start coming out. Wow, look at this. This one's really shedding. It's like anybody have a cat or a dog like that just gets all over the place? A cheap brush is sort of like the poor man's shedding dog. Look at that, a lot of little hairs. It doesn't drive me crazy at this point because this is just my underpainting. But if I was trying to finish this painting and seal it with some paint, that would be cause for some great anxiety. Okay, so now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm just going to put some Mod Podge on the back. Really, the most important thing is getting this well covered, especially right at the edges so that it doesn't lift up. Right. Often people don't go right to the edges because they're afraid of getting paint on the table or whatever, so that's why you'd want to kind of have a little bit of, in fact, let's just wipe this off a little bit so we don't get too much medium spread all over the house here. Okay. And then I'm going to position this. I think I'll go right down to the edge with this particular version here. Okay, and then just going to start kind of burnishing with my finger, spreading outward. You can see there's still, I can move it around still quite a lot, right? Because there's kind of a nice thick coat of paint underneath. Okay. And then I'm just going to go kind of around these edges, making sure it kind of fits nicely on here. And just making now I'm going to let this dry for about 20 minutes so that it really gets a good chance to cure on here. So make sure all of these edges are nice. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, I don't like that I got... It doesn't matter that I got stuff on the face of this painting. It's just that I don't like the discoloration too much, so... But that's... I think it's... Again, we're going to paint over everything anyway, but... Okay. So I'm just going to get some of the excess off here, and then I'll put this brush, some water for a few minutes. Okay, so this original version here with the Mod Podge, I'm going to just set aside to dry. Okay, so on this one, I'm going to use the transfer technique. And I've shown this in many different episodes. The one I think where I went the most in depth with how to do various different ways of doing this, including if you don't have carbon paper like this, and I got this at just like one of those $1 or more stores, I think for like $4 or $5. If you don't have this material, or you don't want to pay for it or order it, you can just scribble it. See, here's my printer, didn't quite get to the top there. So, but you could just scribble a lot of graphite on the back with your pencil, and then transfer it that way. Again, in the Warhol episode, I demonstrated how to do that. So, and you can reuse these sheets over and over and over again. Both of these, you might be able to see it's been used before. I'll see if I can get one more use out of it, and then you can see, because I've used this twice before already. So now we just decide where we want to place this on here. I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna put it in the same location as the cutout version, just so they look as close as possible the same here. And I'll put a little bit of tape on there. So you can see just my little fingernail scratching it, right, makes a little bit of a transfer. Right? That's, depending on how you feel about it, is really cool or a big pain. So I'm just going to quickly do this. I'm not going to go into every little detail here. I've also been today watching some other demo videos by other artist teachers here on YouTube, and I think we're gonna do things maybe a little bit different than what I've seen other people do. Mostly because I wasn't too impressed with the other videos I saw. Seemed to me to be, a lot of them were by people that I don't really think have much of an understanding of how Vermeer actually made his paintings. So I think we'll actually be probably much closer than many of the other videos I've seen that are out there. Let's put a few more lines there. Get the top of this. What would you call this kind of a headdress here? I wonder, it's like a, is it a scarf or? I think this woman was like the studio assistant, housemaid to Vermeer. So she wasn't a particularly wealthy person or glamorous person, which is, I think a feature of Vermeer's painting, and not actually only that, but of Dutch art in general around this period of time. The Dutch were a Protestant nation, or mostly, and they really celebrated the working man, not because really most women weren't allowed to work really at that time. So let's see how well this transferred. Pretty good. So we did probably lose a little bit of detail where the graphite paper had been used before, but for the most part everything transferred there. I mean, again, some of the small little shading on the face is gone, but I'm not too worried about that. You may also notice there's no line here on the back, and that's because the painting itself, if we look at the painting, this backside just sort of disappears into darkness. Same thing around here and even in the back of the neck, right? So we're going to blend things out until she just sort of disappears. And this technique of that really strong lighting that looks very theatrical is called chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro is is an Italian word. To be honest, I don't remember the origin of the term, but it was most famously used by a painter called Caravaggio, Caravaggio de Merci. And Caravaggio is, I think, one of the most outrageously, like his biography. If you want to read a really interesting biography, years ago there was a book that I read called, I think it was called M. The Man Called Caravaggio or something, right? It starts with like just the letter M, because his name, the entire length of his name was Michelangelo de Merci, where he was born. Let me just take a second here to see there's lots of stuff in the chat. People saying, is the volume not loud enough? I think that's as loud as I can get my microphone. Wow. Oh my goodness, look at all the comments already. Irene says she saw the Milkmaid in Amsterdam when you were there at the Rijksmuseum. Right? Great museum. The last time I was there, it was closed. This is many years ago. It was 20 years ago. While they were, or part of it was closed. And the Van Gogh Museum was closed. They were doing a lot of reno at the time. M. Taylor says, I have several almost done paintings from this class. Actually, you know what? I'm going to read some of these while I let some paint dry. So, because I want to get to that next stage here. Let's just take a look at this and see how it's drying. It looks like it's doing okay. I don't see it lifting or too many bubbles happening here, which is good. I'm going to blast it with the hairdryer a little bit just to see if that can speed things up. This area here, it doesn't matter to me whatsoever. It's really underneath the paint or the paper. So the rest of the painting, despite how it looks still very wet, is bone dry, or it's maybe a little bit tacky, but that's dry enough. Underneath here, not as sure. Obviously, I can't tell. One of the ways I can do is see if I can feel the paint squishing around underneath my fingers at all. Now, the only paper I have is actually quite thick. The thickest printer paper you could buy, because I really like that kind of cardstock look. So the downside of that is that it might take longer for paint underneath here to dry. So let's just give one more blast. Okay, so ideally I'd let this dry a little bit longer. However, I want to move forward. So what I'm going to do next is just apply a little bit more Mod Podge onto this surface. I'm going to seal it with another coat. So far all I've done is paint the canvas and the back side of the paper. So now we'll cover the front side of this. And so the purpose of doing this is to really seal that paper in to prevent the paper from moving at all or buckling. It won't move, but it can kind of start to ripple a little bit if we put other paint on top of it, which we, of course, we are going to do. So kind of sealing it in like this is ideal. Now, there is this edge that I've got. So if I wanted, what I could do is to really kind of build up the paint around those edges to kind of create as like a seamless transition between paper and canvas. The Mod Podge will dry mostly clear, so if you're kind of worried like that the image is disappearing a little bit, here's one of these famous hairs. I don't mind the hair being there, but I just don't want it on the face. I don't mind if it's in that darker area there. There we go, or this one here. As you can see, I'm putting quite a lot of it on here. And look at that, you see? That's that ripple there. I don't know if it comes across on camera, but that's just because the underside of this was not fully dry. So you can learn from me what not to do. That should be the name of my channel. And here's another little ripple forming because there is quite also a lot of this material. But ideally, what I would do is do several thin layers, but again, I'm kind of limited with. I'm sure you're probably as uninterested as I am in watching paint dry here. So we'll have a little bit of a few bubbles in there, but things will be just fine. So again, I'm going to actually let's just give it a little bit of a hair dry right now. So one of the things that's happening as I blast it with that air, you really want to let the Mod Podge dry on its own. Let me see. I've got these bubbles forming. Yeah. Okay, so you see, again, what not to do. This is really important. So me trying to do that, I thought that might create that. But the other thing, too, with hair drying it, you could see that certain areas where the paint is thicker, what's happening is the top side is drying before the underside dries. So that's why I get this kind of skin on the top. Like if you leave, 2% milk out on the counter for the day and then you go to pour it down the sink and it might have a little skin on the top, or like kombucha kind of thing, right? So this will work, but that's going to take, I'm just going to let that dry and just got to have a little bit of patience as much as I want to get things done as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's start putting some colors on our palette. What I think is interesting about when we go, the further and further we go back in time, the less and less colors were available to artists. So, Vermeer, if he was to walk into, art supply store today, his jaw would be just dragging around the floor, because he would just, it would be so hard for him to contemplate the availability of all of these colors that we have today to us and how inexpensive they are. In Vermeer's time, 400 and some years ago, he had a very limited selection of colors. Most of the colors that he had were closer to the if we look back at our original color wheel here, most of the colors that Vermeer had were very close to the neutral core, right? So he, like a bright yellow, like this cool yellow, that there was virtually no way to get a color like that. Same thing with some of these blues and purples, right? Most of them are closer to to a brown and gray, right? So artists had to be really, really thoughtful about how they created their paintings to use contrast to help show things rather than color, right? So put that back up there. So okay, let's what we want to do is we're going to mix a ground to put down here. Oh, I'm going to have to get some more white here. Okay, so let's mix our ground. We're going to put a warm yellow ground to get a warm orangey color. This would probably be originally like a yellow ochre, which is a color that would have been available to Vermeer, and you could still buy at the art supply store. So let's get started with some warm yellow. We're going to take some warm red, mix that together. We're going to need a little bit more warm yellow. Oops, that might be a little bit too much blue, but okay, that looks pretty good. Get a little bit more red in here. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white into this mixture, just a little tad. Not too much. Now, some people would, it's possible that you could, this color will work perfectly fine. So this is closer to a little bit more brown than yellow ochre. Yellow ochre would just, if we wanted, we could get just a little more yellow in there. Yellow ochre is a very earthy yellow. And earthy usually is a synonym for warm. So if you ever hear people talking about, that's a real earthy red or an earthy brown, people are usually meaning like warm color. Okay. So we're going to add a lot of water to this. Or not too much, but we'll add water to it. So that's what I could add more white to it, but since I'm painting over a white canvas and I'm going to add some water to it, I don't have to worry so much about, because the white of the canvas is going to act like white paint, right? So let's just grab our water. We can put kind of a nice helping of water in here. The reason why I'm adding so much water is because I want to paint over this whole surface here, and I want as much of these lines to come through, right? What's the point of drawing all those lines on there if we can't see them? And that's another reason why we don't want to put too much white in there, because the white is really good at covering and hiding things, right? So we want to kind of keep that white to a minimum. If I didn't have any image and I was just prepping a canvas that I'm going to put in my backpack and go paint outside, then I could just add as much white on there as I wanted, and I wouldn't have to dilute it with any water either, right? So we can just paint here right across to see the face. So this step we're doing right now is the step that I've seen most of the people showing how to paint this painting omit. and most of them just go right into painting directly onto a white canvas. And you know, if you've made it this far in the course, I would hope that you've kind of seen the wisdom of prepping a canvas this way. And not saying that every painting, obviously we've done a few paintings even recently that haven't used this technique, so it doesn't, this is not like a requirement, but it does make things a little bit easier. And especially if you're, you know, you don't have to worry about getting the paint into all the little nooks and crannies and getting the colors to bunch up right next to one another if you put a ground like this down. The other thing that's nice about doing this is we've now also sealed in the pencil marks, so I don't have to worry about paint going along these graphite lines and then getting mixed into my color, because there's this acrylic plastic surface that has sealed it in. Of course, if I've painted really, really thin, I added a lot of water, there is a small chance that some of the graphite could come back alive and mix in to the graphite, but the chances of that are quite limited. So let's just put that one to the side. And let's see how this one's turning out. This is not my finest hour. I definitely put, I think, a little too much in there in my haste to get this done as quickly as possible. So let's just give it another hair dry. So you see what's happening is the top, as I'm blasting it with hot air, that top layer is definitely drying way faster than the layer underneath it. In fact, there's areas under here that are still very much wet, and then that top surface is drying, kind of sealing in some of the water that would normally kind of bubble its way out. So you can see here I've got this big bubble happening right here. So much so that I'm actually just going to pop these bubbles with a little bit of a razor to allow that air to escape. Right, it should settle back down. Okay, I think that's just making problems worse, so I just have to be patient with that one. I was hoping I could use this same paint that I just mixed up as the ground for that, but I'll have to mix this again shortly. So I'm just going to clean this brush off. Okay. M. Taylor went to the Vancouver Art Gallery exhibit on Vermeer a few years ago and was packed with people. I don't even remember that. Huh, that would have been a cool show to see. Donna's got a really uncomfortable chair. It's hard to sit still for too long. I personally, you can see I'm standing as I paint. I like to be mobile while I'm doing it. It also keeps me awake and kind of into the painting, right? And obviously, not everybody is maybe as youthful and sprightly as I am, and can stand on their feet for several hours. But I do remember I had a teacher when I was in art school who would get who made us actually. It was a drawing class, and we were drawing on easels, and there are these like sawhorses where you can kind of sit down and put your canvas on, and he made us all stack all the chairs and everything and put them in the hallway, because he never wanted anybody sitting down in his class. Everyone had to be standing. So he was like, you got to get into it. You got to be in the painting. It was a great, interesting character for sure. Anyway, I think that habit stuck with me, and so I like being up and standing while I'm painting. So, actually, let's just give this a little bit of air. It's a little bit wet here. Out of the way. Okay, so now we're at the stage where we can really start painting onto this canvas here. And let's get to this view. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using glazing liquid to create super thin layers of almost invisible transparent paint. And the reason why artists use glazing is sort of like the beyond the reasons why artists use this technique hundreds of years ago. We won't even talk about that. Just why you would use it for today is glazing is the sort of safest way to paint in a way. It's the slowest way that you could possibly paint. It's the most time-consuming way to paint, but it also is the most forgiving way to paint, because you're putting such thin layers on each time, and you can make them as thick or thin as you like, but ideally you're making relatively thin transparent layers, and by doing that your margin for error is much lower, because you're not sort of committing to a big blob of one color of paint on the canvas. You can go as kind of timidly as you like to, right? And so you're not taking as many risks as you would be if you were just to start immediately painting directly onto the canvas. Now, again, we've looked at many different artists over the past little while, and who don't use this. In fact, we haven't really used this technique yet. We've kind of done some dry brush versions in the past. So, okay, so what are the differences between glazing liquid and then your gloss or your mediums? Because let's move this out of the way for a moment. Because we've got all these different kinds of mediums, many of which do similar kinds of things. So we can use water to thin the paint out. And water is going to work really well. Water works really great. The thing with water is it dries really quickly, and it's not really super even. So when you use it for cleaning your brush, so it also dilutes. So it not only dilutes the paint, but it breaks down the ability of the paint to stick to the canvas, right? So it's not the best solution possible. It works really well in a pinch, if you don't have anything else, we're going to use a little bit, and I'll show you how to use it. It works pretty well. The other options are matte and gloss medium, or just medium itself, right? Just one is matte, not shiny, and one is shiny, right? And these work really well because it's basically just paint without the color in it. So it will dry transparent. It works a lot like a glaze. The difference is sometimes mediums can have a slight, like milky or foggy quality to them when they dry. They might not be totally transparent. And they also dry relatively quickly, right? They dry just as fast as regular acrylic paint does. You're just sort of adding more of the bonding mechanism, kind of like adding glue into the paint, right? So our slow dry medium or retarder also works well for this exercise as well. It's just that its intended purpose is to slow the drying time of the paint down. So you can do a lot of the same things as glazing. It's just that, again, they may not, if you use a lot of it, you may not get quite as transparent as a look as the glaze. What's another quality of, obviously also with glazing, it does slow down the drying time for your paint. So sometimes people will use these interchangeably and not really notice much difference at all. The one thing I would say is that if you're planning on doing a lot of glazes, many layers, you'd probably be best to get the material that is made specifically for that purpose, because it's possible that if you're using some of these other mediums and really building up surfaces, that they could start to kind of crack. And even when you're using this glazing liquid, you don't want to put it on too thick, because just like actually a lot of other paints, especially the slow dry medium, if you put too much of any of these into your paint and try to do a real big thick layer of paint, it's possible that paint will never dry fully, and it'll always be a little bit tacky and kind of not necessarily wet. Like it won't be so much that you can wipe the paint off with your finger, but it will be tacky in the sense that, let's say you have a very dusty house, you could notice that dust sticks to the surface of the painting, and it's virtually impossible to get off. Like you try to wipe it with a cloth or a Kleenex, and a whole bunch of little pieces of the Kleenex stick to the surface of the painting, and then you're like panicking, and then you get a wet cloth to wipe it off, and then you might actually wipe some of the paint off. So you want to think about not adding too much to the surface. Okay, so let's dive right into this painting and do this. Okay, so let's just kind of quickly investigate this paint. I'm just looking at all of the comments you guys have left. Let me see if I can jump to any. Deborah says, I can't wait to go to the National Gallery now. This class is amazing and has taught me so much. That's great. You know, I think the more you know about how to paint, other paintings are so much more exciting to look at, because now you know a little bit more about how it's done. I think it's maybe the difference between just going to a sporting event and knowing a little bit about it versus if you've played that game or you're with somebody that knows a lot about how to play it, then they're like, oh, the reason why that person got a penalty is because of so, and you're like, oh. Or if you've played the game, you can understand the strategy of why some player is in a different part, and you're like, oh, because I know what they're doing, right? So it's a lot, obviously, the more you know about something, the more satisfying it is to watch or partake in it, right? Scarlett Johansson has lips like the girl with the pearl earring. We looked at the sound. I'm not sure what happened with that. May says, I glued the sketch with Mod Podge already. It ended up with some deep wrinkles that I couldn't get out. Any tips? Would heavier paper have helped? The paper was already curling with the glue. It is, if you're finding Mod Podge is making the paper curl a lot, you might want to think about not adding as much of the material of that, because the Mod Podge has water in it, right? So the more water gets in there, the more wrinkled it be. I do use a thicker paper, and that does seem to help a lot. The thinner the paper, like if you're trying to use rice paper, just forget it, right? The rice paper, if you're trying to glue that down, you're best to use, I have some spray adhesive that you can use. So they're usually spray adhesive isn't really water-based at all. So you can spray it and glue it down. Of course, spraying rice paper, the paper is going to blow all over the place. A little bit tricky. There are specialty glues, however, for rice paper, because there's been people doing rice paper collages for thousands, or not thousands, maybe 1,000 years. So, I don't have a roller to use or a brayer. Sometimes just using your hand can help. If it's really wrinkling like that, it's really tough to, once it's kind of wrinkling, unless you can, because the paper is, like, you really almost have to then pull the paper outward, like the edges of it, to try to, and it's really going to create a bit of a mess. So, might want to just try thinner layers next time. Let me see. Deborah says her cloak looks like it is silk, so I think that she was a young girl because silk is expensive. It's also possible, usually artists would dress up. They might have like their own wardrobe of, like one of those tickle trunks, dress-up trunks that I used to have when I was a kid. All sorts of fabrics and hats and wigs and stuff. So a lot of artists would have robes and clothes that they could use to dress up a model, because often artists would hire poor people to pose for them because they didn't have to pay them as much, right? If you're going to hire somebody to sit for like 4 or 5 hours for you, you want to pay them as little as possible if you don't have enough money yourself, right? So, and it's also, of course, possible that the artist, she could have been dressed up in tattered clothes with, little patches and stuff all over it, and the artist just decides to make it look brand new and pretty and clean, right? So that's one of the magic things artists have, is we can kind of make some changes as we paint things. I glued the sketch too, and the bubbles came out as it dried, which is what should happen if you're more patient than I am. The headpiece, Irene says the headpiece is a turban, and it is sometimes called the girl with the turban as well, I think. Interesting. Talking about rolling pins working. Patricia says, what's the deal with the rolling pin? I did use, for anybody that was, you can use a rolling pin, or you could use, like, say, a tube of paint to kind of roll things out if you're trying to kind of get a nice even surface with the paint. Natalie says, I like to paint on my feet too. It's like I am grounded. Yeah, it's kind of nice to have your feet on the ground when you're painting. My table's too low to Deborah says, tickle trunk. Mr. Dressup. Yes, you're showing your age, Michael, for the kids that have a tickle trunk. Yes, Mr. Dressup. That was the big thing when I was a little kid. Okay, so Michael, focus. Let's make a painting today. I just get so excited chatting with you guys because it's so neat. My wife and I talk all the time about how cool it is, all the people that have joined the Facebook page and who are just independently uploading new stuff or some of the versions of these paintings. So it's just so exciting to be able to see this interaction. Okay, so now that we've got the ground painted, we're going to start painting different parts of the face. I'm going to probably do, let's say, 30% of this, and then paint the background, and then come and do the rest of the details here. So, where's my brushes? Here we go. Let me see. Get a few brushes out. And some of the smaller ones. So, the thing with glazing And there's different ways to go about it, but what many people will do is kind of start with some of the darker and then go to some of the lighter, then go back to dark and light and kind of start moving contrasts outwards. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the kind of skin tone. Now, one thing I could have done when I was painting this this wash to start with is I could have tried to mix the the general skin tone of this face if I wanted. Let's just take a look. Remember I said I was going to show you something about how to match colors? So let's go back to this online this website here. And again, the link is in the description below. So if I go here, I can upload an image. So let's say here's the picture. And then I can take this cursor and I can drag it around to different parts of the painting. And if you notice down here, it's showing what that color actually is. All right, so I can move it to the blue, this yellow. Right, so you can see most of the painting is yellows, blues, right, a little bit of deep purple in there, and then some of these kind of peachy tones, right, a little bit of red obviously on the lips, but for the most part we have white or blue and yellow in this painting. So let's try to let's zoom in on this image here. Uh-oh, what have I done? Let me just reload this page. Whoa. Okay, so let's put this picture back up here. So what I'm going to look for is kind of the general face tone here. So let's say right here in the forehead, that might be a little bit too bright. And the cheeks are going to have a lot more red, so kind of forehead, bridge of the nose area. And that takes us to here. Now, if you've used Photoshop or anything like that, you're familiar with this. But for painters, it's probably a little bit strange. What am I looking at? So what I do is there's this hex number here. And this is like a paint number where this is, you can take this paint. I wonder if you could take it to Home Depot and you could mix a paint. So here's another website. Again, the link is in the description. And I'm going to paste this in here. So you see when I paste it in here, now this gives us a little bit closer idea of the color wheel. Right, and if we think of our colors, right, here is this is our cool yellow, right, somewhere around here, this is cool yellow, and this is our warm yellow, this is our warm red right in about here, this is our cool red right about here, this is our warm blue right about here, or ultramarine is somewhere here, a little bit of purple in it. And then our cool blue is somewhere right around here. Right, so we have like cool, warm, warm, cool, warm, cool. Cool again, right? So let's just go back to, let's paste this back in here. So this is this color, right? And look how different this color looks right here, right? When we look at it here, oh, it looks like this kind of dirty brown, boring color. But this color was something we selected right around here, right? We look at it and like, oh, this must be a really bright color. But when we go back here, look how kind of dull it is comparatively, right? And that's because, especially this big, black area surrounding the painting makes everything else look much brighter than it actually is. And so we can also change this color by adding, let's say if we add more white to that same color, that's what it looks like. It looks like a gray right there, right? Barely any color. We're adding less. I think this is the color without any addition. It's just that color all by itself. And then if we add more black to it, right, then, right, so this is, and then I can't remember if one side is the tint, or the, if we are the tone, right, so this is shade when we add black to it, tint when we add white to it. I don't know if there's a tone where you're adding gray to it. Anyway, so if we look at this, this means that we've got this kind of brown, it's peachy brown, that has a lot of white in it, right? If we go back up here, right, we've got a warm red and a warm yellow, and it's being pulled towards the center with some blue to make it a brown. Okay, so how do we mix that color? Let's do that right now. So, where's my paintbrush? I usually like to mix colors with a little bit larger paintbrush. So we've already mixed this color, works pretty well, right? We've got the warm yellow, warm red, and a little bit of warm blue. So we have this color already, which was pretty close to this one here. It might have been, our color that we have on the palette right now is maybe a little bit closer to up here, right? So to get that, we could add a little bit more blue back into the color. So let's just do a little bit of that. We could take this color, add a little bit more blue in. Might have been a little much. And then we're going to add a bunch of white. Remember, that was how we got that color to be so much more light. Right, so now this looks, it's going a little bit on the green side of things. So I'm going to add a little more blue back in, or sorry, red in there. A little bit more white. Just a little bit more blue. That blue starts pulling that color closer and closer to the neutral core, making it a little bit more grayish looking. So that's pretty good. It's not exactly the same color here. In fact, it looks still very red. So let's put a little bit more blue in there. Obviously now it's tricky trying to match something up to a television screen. A little bit more red, so kind of taking it into a purpley area here. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. And just a little more white in there. Okay, so let's bring our painting down. Here, let's maybe put that color right above there. And since we got a lot of, okay. So if we go back to the painting itself, now we can think about where we want to apply this color. All right, we can, this looks a little bit darker than maybe I'd hoped, but I'm going to paint, again, it's also it's hard to really judge that without this dark black here, which is why sometimes people will paint that color in to begin with. So I'm going to paint this kind of around a lot of her features here. I'm just kind of getting a little bit thin too, because I still want a little bit of this paint from underneath to show through. And we haven't even started glazing yet, so. In fact, let's just get some of the heavier parts of the paint off. You know what? Yeah, this is fine. What I should have done, in fact, I am just going to wipe this off here. You see it took a little bit of the paint off. I am going to add some of my glazing liquid to this painting. I should have done that before, but let's see. Okay, so I'm going to use, personally, I'm going to use the satin glaze. I like a little bit more transparent paint, or not transparent. I like more semi-transparent, not even transparent, less glossy. That's what I'm trying to think of, the term. So let's say I'm going to put some of the glazing liquid off to the side here, and then I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to work some of this glazing liquid in here. I don't need too much of it. In fact, that's probably quite a lot. The glazing liquid also slows down the drying process. So if I put too much in here, it could also really slow down the whole painting process. Okay. So let's do this again. I'm just going to kind of mostly paint over a lot of the painting, and I can spread out the paint a lot. So the great thing with glazing is it allows us to, the paint will be dry or wet for an extended period of time, and will allow us to work. If we want, we can paint other colors into it, and we can still see those colors through. So actually this is a pretty thick application of glaze, or of, as we go here, we'll see that there's going to be times where I'm painting, and you'll be like, did he even paint anything on there? I don't even really see anything happening. Okay. So if you're like, oh no, I wiped that paint off and I see some streaks coming through, don't worry about it. Because we can, all of this is going to get more layers of paint on here subsequently. Okay. So we're going to blow dry that, because that should still be wet there for another like 10 minutes probably. Okay. That looks pretty good. It looks a little bit tacky, but I think it'll be fine. So if we look at this color again, so we're going to continue glazing. In fact, I'm going to go to a different brush here. It's a smaller brush. And now let's think about adding a little bit of a darker color on the face. All right, so I got my glazing liquid here. You can see as I spread it out, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner like that. So you could be just adding water to it to do this kind of thing, but as we've seen when we've added water, the brush dries really, really quickly. So what if we do this and we just take a little bit of blue in here? A little tiny dab of blue to this glaze. And then we could take this and we could start kind of, I don't even know if you can see this on the screen because it's so thin, but I can kind of come down here and put a very light shadow onto her face here. Right, almost imperceptible, which is what we want. So you can see how what I mean, like it's pretty forgiving, because if I'm not happy with it, right, I can make changes. It's like, how to think of it is, it's like depending on how thick you apply your glazes, you can really go very, very slow, and you don't really have to worry about over painting anything. So let's add a little bit more of this blue in here, because the blue right now is kind of acting a little bit like black, but without getting too dark too quickly. Alright, so let's just take this. Okay, see how much darker that is? That shows up a little bit better on camera. So this allows you to get like super subtle transitions of color, because you're just building things up very slowly. In fact, like I'm kind of going faster than and with more opaque, thicker layers of paint than you might want to do with this paint. Right? You might want to go a little bit more slowly and build up those layers a little more slowly. Oops, that's a lot of blue in there. So fill this area in here just so I don't have a ridge or anything. Okay, one thing is you kind of want to let the layers dry each time. And I was painting wet on wet just because I'm a little bit impatient, but let's get some more blue on our brush. And you can see the more I just sort of spin this glazing fluid in there, the more transparent it gets. So So some of you watching today are going to be really excited because you think, wow, this is kind of like the perfect process for me, because I'm always like a little bit too scared to go too dark or too quickly. So this works really well. So I'm just going to blast it with some. Okay, so let's go on the other end of the spectrum. right? I think you're kind of starting to understand this process. So let's just add a little bit more white to this same mixture. So we'll take a little bit of white here. Sorry, white down here. I can mix this in. We'll take a good scoop. I want to make sure I don't, you know, again, the white covers very quickly. So when we're working with white, we want to use it kind of sparingly when we're glazing. Otherwise, we'll cover up our other layers too quickly. So that seems pretty good. We'll see how things go here. It's pretty intense. Again, I'm painting maybe much faster than we would normally want to with this material. Right, and then we can kind of blend it back out. Right, we can put it into where the highlights are. And you can also take another brush and kind of just gently blend, like it appears that you're blending, but you're just sort of smoothing that color out over the another dried surface. Even just put, well, they'll do that with a different color eventually. And so to make things kind of brighter, you're just kind of going back over the same place and kind of blending that in or spreading it out over that area. Okay, so right now I'm just trying to get some of these little highlights, brighter areas of her face. See right here, the kind of nose almost disappears a little bit into the cheek because they're very similar. Like the light is kind of hitting it even. We have a very bright light hitting her face. Okay, so that's pretty good for right now. So I think, actually I forgot her neck here. Oops, let's do a little bit of that real quick. That's a lot of white on my brush. Okay. Now, let's just take a quick little tea break. I think what I'm going to do now, I'm going to paint some blue into here and then some of her clothes down here. And then we'll paint the black on top. So when we're mixing this blue, well, actually, you know what? Let's just take a quick second to try to figure out how we match that blue, if you're interested in trying getting as close as possible. So let's say we go into this area here. Although ideally what we probably want to do is go for this blue, and then we can lighten and darken. So, because this blue right in here, if we're looking, what I'm looking at is this area here, which I would think is like the underpainting part of it. Alright, so if I can get as close as possible in there. Okay, so let's copy this. And then put it there. Okay, so do you see what this looks like? So this, we know we've got a little bit of black in that color, and it's a little bit on the cooler side of things, but it's also not right in the cool, right? This is your cool, this is your warm, and we were sort of around here, right? So we go back to that color. So we're kind of a little bit on the in between the blues, with a tiny little bit of red or orange on the other side. So it's got a little bit of almost a brownish quality. So let's mix this color. Let me see. Let's get another brush. Okay, so we're going to take some warm blue. We take some cool blue. All right, we get this mixture right here. Nice, that's beautiful color. And already that's pretty close. I guess you can't lift it right over, but that's pretty good color right there. Now, what I would do is just take a little dab of that red just to kind of dull it down, right? And you can already see it's like almost as if I added a bit of black to it, right? A little bit of brown. Now, if I put this color on there right now, it's going to be pretty intense. So, like, if I put this here, I think we're going to add a little bit of white into that color. Okay. I'm also going to add a little bit of, let's add the glazing liquid to this. And the glazing liquid, you know, takes time to dry too, so I don't mind if it kind of sits here like that and kind of gets a little bit, you know, I don't have to worry about it being dried in just a few minutes. So we got this color here, and I could have just used water for this to create a wash, but again, we're using this material, so I think the back of her head would be somewhere around in there. Right, if you don't like all those brush strokes, you can just sort of try to blend them back out. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm going to put a darker layer over top, but I'm going to now add some white to it. Just make sure I got some of that glazing medium in here. And then let's just start painting this right next to it. And I can also do a little bit of blending. Okay. And then let's add even more white to this mixture. Now, right now it looks a little bit. We see a lot of the brush strokes in there, right? And part of what we want to use the glazing for is to get rid of brush strokes, but we'll get there eventually, right? The first few layers over another color, we're going to see some of that, but as we go, some of that's going to disappear. So if I really wanted to avoid that altogether, then I would just really want to try to apply super transparent layer of color to start out with. I'm going to put some of this blue down here while I've got it on my paintbrush. Yeah, it looks like that blue kind of goes up into here, right? So, oh, maybe there was some yellow down here, so I'll just wipe a bit of that away. Okay, that's pretty good so far. Good start. I really want to try to get as much of this painting done today as possible. So, or I will finish a version of it. Whether it's as good as Vermeer is extremely unlikely. So let's find a different color that we can mix here. So let's say up in this hair, or the turban. All right, so what is this color? Now, this is not stuff that when I'm painting, I do myself, but I know that a lot of people struggle with trying to mix color. So that color that from the top of her hat, her turban here, this is definitely in the warm, like an orange, a warm orange with a little bit of blue to make it a brown with a lot of white in it, right? So let's mix that color. Let's see. We will take, where should I mix this? We'll mix it maybe right here. We need some more paint. Okay, I don't need so much blue. I guess that view's fine. Okay. Oh, I can even use a little bit of that, the red that was on my brush. That works pretty well. So we've got this color. Let's see, is there any little blue I can snag off of that? Cool. And we just need a bunch of white. A little bit more white. So let's see, how close are we? Pretty good. I'm actually going to add a little bit more blue. Just a tiny bit, right? I don't have to go wild on that, right? There's just a little bit of blue on there. And again, that's going to make it go a little bit more brown. If I put too much in there, it's going to start going green. That's pretty good. Okay. So, oh, and I forgot to put my glazing liquid in here. So let's steal some of this and really dilute it with some more. So, oops, let's go to, oh, paint this color up here. And again, your instinct might be go like, wow, that's not yellow enough. I'm going to really dig in and get some really bright yellow. And it might look fine right now, but when we put that black in its place in around here, all of a sudden that yellow will look really yellow. And then you'll be like, oh, I got to tone that down because it's just so bright. Too much. So the whole thing with glazing is it's all about subtlety, right? That's why some painters really liked it. You know, like obviously the classical painters, this was one of the only techniques they had, so they didn't really have much choice. But you could see why when tubes of paint became available in the 1800s, the Impressionists embraced it immediately. They're like, wow, this is so cool. We don't have to do these really thin layers of paint anymore. We can just squeeze paint right out of the tube directly onto the canvas, and boom, we're off and running. This is so exciting. Okay, so let's now, this is pretty good to start with, so let's now take a little bit more blue. And if we had all the time in the world, what I would be doing is doing like almost imperceptible transitions of color. So now I'm going to take this and we'll just start kind of going to some of the slightly darker areas. I could be doing this again with just water added to my paint, but I won't be able to get quite as thin of paint like this with, like, there's no urgency. When I'm painting this, I can take my time. You can see how I can blend the paint out for, you know, a good 5 minutes, even if I'm going really thin. If I was doing this with water on my brush, it would be kind of like, okay, I got kind of one chance to do this, and there's like there's a bit of anxiety when you're painting that way with water. With glazing, it's like the exact opposite. This is like the slowest, most subtle way of painting. Alright, okay, that's a kind of good enough to start. Let's go back down here, and we're going to paint this area, and then I'm going to paint in the black. And then boom, the painting's going to change completely, really quickly. So, I'll clean off my brush. So the stage we're at right now is kind of, this would have taken Vermeer probably a couple of weeks to do. Because to paint this with oil paint like this, you'd have to wait for each of those layers to dry. So we're already going like 5 times faster than Vermeer. And we're going to continue going really fast. We'll try to get this painting done in about the next hour here. So let's get the close down here. So we'll use this technique to figure a little bit about this color. Let's go into kind of the brightest part of this kind of, it looks kind of like almost gold part of the close. Okay. So then we'll punch it into, oh, sorry, you can't see that. Let's go to, let's do this again. So what I'm doing is I went into the close, right, kind of the brightest part, but not the white part, not a highlight. There's not really any highlights in this area anyway. It looks like it kind of goes from this color and then darker. So if we get this color here, go into my color picker. Boom. So you see this? Look at, we're actually a quite bright orange, right? Just a little tiny bit of blue. That's not what this, when I'm pointing it here, this doesn't mean there's blue in it. This is actually the complementary color, like the exact opposite color. So I don't want to confuse you. This doesn't mean that there's blue in there, but because it's not, like this here is right at the edge of the color wheel, so super saturated color. We're in a little bit more, which suggests that we are either using maybe a cool color and mixing across the color wheel, or we're using the warm color here and adding a little bit of blue to it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but let's punch this color back in here. Okay, so we have a warm orange with a little bit of white in it. So let's mix that color here. So we're going to use, we can actually use, this is very similar color to what we did last time, except it's just got a little bit more red in it. So it's a little bit more orange and a little bit of white. Let's see. Just going to mix it. I often use every available part of the painting surface here. This color, steal a little bit of blue, tiny bit of it, and that just helps take a little bit of that intense saturation off the paint. And then get my glazing liquid. I'll just put a big splotch of it there so I can use it for a bunch of different colors. And then I'm just going to take some of that paint off, and then here we go. And if we just take a quick, you can even see my palette. It's pretty close there. I could add a little bit more blue to get in there, but let's just, for the sake of time, I'm going to just start painting this in here. Now I could paint over the entire thing with this color if I wanted. Some of this, the other areas are darker, so I'm just going to, I'll paint those in a little bit separately, but I don't have to worry about it being perfect. Again, that's the great thing with the glazes, is I just have a lot more room for error because I'm painting such thin, transparent layers each and every time. Okay, so let's darken that down. It looks like it's just adding some blue to it. So I'll add a little bit of this warm blue. Again, I'm really pushing things because I want to get things done quickly. Ordinarily, this could take me, you know, I could spend at least a week just painting these clothes down here. And I'm just going to paint this out a little bit more, even though this whole area is going to be black, just so I have that same color I can blend into later on. I'm going to hit it with the blow dryer real quick. Okay, so now we're going to add some black to this. Now, I'm going to suggest we don't go full black and just take the black out of the tube. I want a little bit of this glowing warmth to come through. So I'm going to do like a thinner layer of black, and I may actually mix some other colors into it to help. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to mix some black with some cool blue. Again, this is our background, so I kind of want it to go backwards. And yeah, so let's get some black out. And just move this here. So let's put some black on there. I don't need too much of it. Remember how far black goes as a color. It really covers things up pretty quickly. I'm gonna get a little bit larger brush out. Often when I take these brushes, I like to just sort of try to pull on it gently, not too hard, because I've sometimes with these cheap brushes you can pull out all of the hairs, but just trying to see if I can get as many of them out as possible. Okay, let's take the cool blue. You know what, I'm going to take a bit of the cool red in here. I'll make it like a really deep purple. Yeah, just a little bit of black. You see how that instantly just becomes a black, right? So that was darker than I was hoping for it to be. So let's just steal some more of this blue and the red. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a really nice deep purple. And it's a deep cold purple. So we can add some glazing fluid to this. We could just add water to this. We could add the slow dry medium to this. When we're doing a big wash like this, it's not so important. I'm just because we've been using it, I'm gonna add some of the glazing liquid to that. Okay. So, the one advantage of adding a little bit of the medium to this is I might be able to do a little bit more brushing around some of these edges and get a little bit more subtlety than I otherwise might not be able to get. Get the edges of the painting too. So I'm not too fond of, I kind of lost a little bit of some of the shape of her face a bit. That's okay. Okay. I'm gonna need to mix a little bit more of that color. So let's get a little more blue on here. I personally like it when the colors aren't exactly exact. Let's get the medium on here. I like a little bit of that variation. So just squeezing that paint out so that it's got a nice even color at the very least. Okay, just going around those edges. Okay, and then here I'm going to start going into her back here where clothes are ultimately going to fade out into this color. And then I'm going to put a little bit of this in here as well. And I'm using basically a giant brush for this thing, which I should be using a much smaller one like this. This is what I should have done earlier, but okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this here and I'm adding a lot more glazing medium to it. Oops. Right, and I can take this and just bring out some of this onto her face. So and I can take my brush and just take this and soften up any areas which I've been a little bit too hard on. Let's do a little bit of this going in the other direction too. Up into her turban here. I can do the same thing here. I can do the same thing. So again, I'm going way faster than you would ideally want to use this technique for, but I think you could start understanding how it works. just going to hit this with the hair dryer. Okay, I'm going to do the face here in just a few minutes. Just while I've got this darker color on here, I'm just going to do a little bit more of the shadow. Kind of building this area up here. Ear in there. It's got a little, some of those pencil lines started to disappear a little bit, so just have to be a little bit more observant of the original to capture that. Okay, and I could do more on the face. Actually, let's do a little bit dark on the face here. So I really want to be very careful. I have to get really thin with the glazing liquid here. That might be a little bit much. Let's use this. Take as much paint off my brush and just dip into the glazing liquid like that. Right, you almost want just barely anything on there. And then we can come back. Okay. See how we can, we're still a ways away from doing it exactly like Vermeer, but I think you could see sort of the progression here, right? I see. Laurie asks, when do you use gloss and when do you use satin glaze? Especially wonder how it affects skin tones. Great question. I always prefer to use satin or matte finish, personally. And then if you really want it to be glossy, you could use the glaze to go on afterwards, and the gloss will make the colors pop and be brighter. I guess I just always never particularly like the reflective quality of, you're trying to look at the painting and it's too shiny. I find that, especially when I'm painting outdoors. I used to do a lot of plein air landscape painting years ago, and when you have like light shining on the painting and it's reflecting off the shinier parts, it can make it kind of tricky to not only mix colors but to even see the true color on the canvas. So the duller the color is, for me, it makes my life a little bit easier. And then if I want, I can put a glaze of a reflective like this. You could, so if you paint very matte, you could use the gloss afterwards, and all of a sudden the colors will punch up and get much more bright. The more glossy the painting is, tends to be the blacks look blacker, and the saturated colors look a little bit more saturated. So your contrasts kind of come out. They're a little bit more contrasty in image. Whereas a matte tends to be a little bit softer of a quality. And I would say most paintings that you've ever seen in a museum have been varnished or glazed afterwards, usually also to protect the painting. So often people, especially with older paintings, will use well, you probably want to use one of these. If you've got like a $10,000 painting or a $10 million painting, you want to take it to a conservator. You don't want to start doing things like that, otherwise you'll end up like that poor little woman in the church in Italy who repainted the face of Jesus. They and caused a big scandals. Okay, so let's blow dry this really quickly. I don't know if I just did that, but so what I was just doing there is I've got a bit of a ridge from when I put that black paint on, and it was a little bit sloppy, and I was just seeing if I could whisk a little bit of that paint away. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go in and start painting the eyes and the lips. And again, the painting is going to transform pretty quickly from that point. Okay, so we're going to zoom. Actually, before I do that, let's actually just take again another look at these colors in the painting. All right, we look at the white of these eyes, and we just take a copy. This is, I tried to find the whitest part of the eye. Right, we are basically the same color that we mixed earlier on for the face, except we have almost all white, right? So this is, if we were right here, we're like basically pure white. So it's basically like the face, but with a lot of white in there, which isn't surprising because you kind of want. A lot of people make the mistake of just putting white paint right in the eyes, or on teeth, or as a highlight, and that often is just way too bright, right? It makes it look like there's like a spotlight blaring on somebody's face, and it's not particularly flattering. So I'm going to take some of the paint that I had mixed here previously. All right, I still got a little bit of it. I don't need much because, again, I'm going to use a lot of white. So take this color, take some of the glazing medium, and then we'll just let's see, let's zoom in. Oops, the other way, and then let's bring this out. Okay. So, all this is dry. I go in here. This is where you really end up spending weeks and weeks painting all these little details. We're not going to spend this much time, at least I'm not. And you can see that I didn't go white so quick. If I want to make it more white, I can add more white to it eventually. But I don't want to go leaping there. Right, I'm going to now just take this and add a little bit more highlights. The same color. And do I have a brush I can use for this? Just to kind of soften things up. This is just a big cheap old brush, so I don't want to, it's not the best for this purpose, but you can see it's barely, like there's barely any paint on this brush. Or, well, there's paint on there, but there's the glazing liquid is pretty intense, right? So, or I've got a lot of it, so it's, the painting just barely changes as I paint on it. I'm looking for where the highlights are, so the forehead, nose, the cheeks, the top lip here, and then the chin. Right, and as this dries, I can just kind of add a little bit more. Highlight on her eyes too, so I can grab that. Okay. And then let's darken this down a bit. So we'll go the other way and we'll start adding towards the pupils of the eye. So here was the darker version that I had used earlier. And I'm just going to add a little bit of blue in there. It's pretty intense, so we'll just thin it out with some glazing liquid. And let's see what we got. I mean, barely anything on there, which is fine, but actually I'm going to use the hair dryer here real quick. So let's take slightly darker color. So I'm curious, people that are watching me right now, like how do you feel about this particular technique? Is it too slow, or is it kind of like a revelation because you're like, oh wow, like now I could paint, and I feel like I have more, there's more room for error because I can just paint slower and I don't have to worry about getting the brushes and the marks in exactly the right place. Okay, I think I'm just going to speed things up by going a little bit more bold. So I'm going to take a little bit more of the blue. And let's paint this. Into her eyes, let's go. And if you kind of feel like, oh no, I went too dark in places, don't worry, we can always brighten that area up a little bit with a little bit more glaze, right? We can soften out those areas. Heavy on that one, so just brush a bit of it away. Okay, so now let's do her lips. So our lips are going to be warm red. And then I'm going to come over here where I got lots of this glazing liquid still out. So it's depending on how bold you feel to do this. You see how we can paint and it just barely goes red, right? It's changing, but barely changing, right? In fact, I can even take a little bit of this red and just put a little bit of warmth back into this side of her face. Right, a bit on her nose. Cheeks there. Just blush. Warm that area up. If you want to go a little, you're like, oh, it's too slow, I need to go a little faster, right? Just adding a little bit more red in here. Okay. So, I'm going to hit it with the hairdryer, and then I'm going to start outlining with some darker color. So let's see. I'm going to do the same mixture that I used earlier for the background. I'm just going to steal some of this color, and I'm going to use glazing medium. I'd like to try to get this painting done in the next like half hour, or as much as possible anyway. That's what I told my wife anyway. So that means I'm just going to have to cut a few corners. Okay, so let's come in here. Top eyelid on both paintings. Not sure what happened there. Just get rid of that. Okay, so you can see that's pretty dark, pretty quick. So let's see. I'm gonna just take. Oops, that's a lot of white in there. How'd that get there? Let's come back to glaze. Let's add more glaze on here. Actually, I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush now. This is taking a bit of much darker, and I'm moving quicker, so I won't be able to get the same level of subtlety that I'd like, but in the interest of finishing the painting in a reasonable amount of time. Soften that up. So you see how, like, the great thing about using the glaze is this is a darker color, and so when I put it over other dark areas, those dark areas also get darker. Versus if I mixed this paint and I had a dark color and I put it, but it wasn't as dark as this, and I painted over here, it would actually lighten that area. Right? So this actually, as long as I'm painting a dark color, but it's just a very thin glaze, then I don't have to worry about accidentally lightening up my shadows. If that makes sense. So now I'm just kind of hurrying as quickly as I can, softening a bit as I go. So things aren't going to be as nice and smooth as I would have hoped, but I'm going to do a little bit of that earring there. And I'm going to paint a bit of that white on the collar here. So here's just some white right out of the tube. So this is a really, really bright white. Now I can take this white and soften it up here momentarily. And so I'm going to blow dry this. So, let's clean off some of this white, and let's go back over here with that darker color. Making sure I got the glazing medium in it. Let's do the same up here. Same thing with the earring. I can come in, just darken that a bit. That's all going to fade to black shortly. So I'm just basically taking the same darker color and just doing kind of these very thin glazes. So the final touch is I could put little pops of light there on. Oh, there's a little bit of white in her teeth there, isn't there? So that doesn't look great right now, but we can clean that up as we go. So we're going to use this similar technique again when we paint the Artemisia Gentileschi painting. Is it next week? We're going to do that. So we'll have an opportunity to really kind of do it again and reinforce some of these lessons we've been talking about. Okay, let's go back into the headdress here. Let's get a little bit darker in there. Again, I'm just going to drag this down into this darker area. Okay, and then how about we'll just, while we've got this darker color on, here, let's go down to her back area. And just keep. So one thing I love about glazing is I don't have to worry so much about mixing colors. Once I've got a kind of a good color that I'm happy with down, I can just use, to darken it, very light glazes of a darker color to darken it. I mean, ideally you would still use the actual color itself, but you can see like a darker version of that same color, but you can see it's pretty open to accepting like I'm not radically changing the color this way. All right, we'll start to blend her body out into this darker area. It might need a little, I'll have to let that dry. Same thing here. Let's get smaller brush. And then I can take this dry brush and just soften that up. Okay, we can take this same darker color. You see, I've taken the same color, I've applied it onto the face, onto the hat, onto her clothing, and then onto her headdress. I haven't mixed a new color in like 20 minutes, right? It's just this really thin glaze of a darker blue. This is actually the same blue that I used for the background. For a few minutes. Okay, so let's zoom back out. I'll just see where we stand so far after a couple of hours of painting. What I want to do next is I'm going to paint, like I feel like this headdress is almost done, this area here. I could put some lighter highlights on this side. But for the most part, this all makes sense, right? It's pretty much all there. This area I'm going to get some much brighter yellow in, and I'm going to come in here and also add a little bit more yellow into here. And then really we're pretty close, except just more, however long you want to spend on the face, right? So let me see, I'm just going to clean a few brushes while we're here. So this side is definitely getting more light, so it looks a little bit lighter, but it's pretty consistent all the way around. I am probably going to go over top of it with another very thin glaze of dark paint. But I personally like seeing some of that. I want some of the glow of the warmth from that very, very first color we put down. Maybe it's worth just checking this guy out here. So the reason why I wanted to try this out is because you could basically just paint light glazes of like the skin tone and the hat, this blue and the yellow over top of this. You know, maybe when I mix this yellow, I'll just do that right over here, and you can see how we can use that image for this purpose. Okay, so that's needs to be cleaned as well. So, wow, there's lots of comments. When I asked, how do people feel about this? Anyone see the movie where Mr. Bean worked for an art gallery and he fixed up Whistler's mother? Mr. Bean is one of my favorite. Oh my goodness, yes. You saw that at the Olympics, him playing the piano, the Chariots of Fire. That was great. Irene says, I like this method. I do feel like there's more control, especially with faces, which I struggle with. Right, so yeah, definitely makes it much easier to do faces because you can go as slow as you want. Right, you don't really have to worry about going too far, and if you go too far, you just put another little glaze of a slightly lighter color over top of it. Lori says, I think I will like it for portrait painting. Hopefully I have the patience. Jean says, painting this way does take a little longer, but it's great to experience doing it this way. So I don't think I would want to use glazing liquid all the time, for sure. And this is what I've been trying to do with this class, is to really show you guys as many different approaches and techniques for acrylic painting as possible, so that hopefully along the way there's one thing that's just like you hook onto. You're like, that's the one I like. I like painting like Matisse, one color side by side by side, not painting one color and kind of adding colors. It's like just attacking the canvas directly. Some people really like the Anne Savage way of painting, right? Of much faster way, a little bit more bold version than painting this way, right? I mean, you can see there's lots of different approaches and techniques. Every artist has their own way of approaching this. Lori says, I haven't seen that, Deborah. I must look for it. Deborah. Oh, the Mr. Bean clip, yes. And Paula, thank you so much for the contribution through the super chat. Again, if you're finding this helpful, please like and subscribe to the video. And if you have any extra couch change around, I would be very grateful for any donations. There's the PayPal link below. If you want to send a check or money order or a something else, you can contact me through my Facebook or my website. The links to those things are below there. Deborah says, it is quite entertaining. I think that I would like to try this method. I was unable to get supplies on time from Amazon. The glaze is to arrive tomorrow. Perhaps I can finish painting using it. Lori says, could you paint some of the face without glaze and then use glaze on top and get the same effect? Absolutely. Yeah, you could paint. We could have done this whole thing with just adding water to our paint, right? And we've tried to do that a number of times. Like if we go back to what was the Goodwin painting, the Betty Goodwin painting we did. Remember, I had the water dripping over the surface of the paint, and it kind of looked like, half of her face was in silhouette. We could have used this same technique for that, and we probably would have got a better result. But I just didn't want to introduce these mediums at that point in the course. You could paint like this and then paint thick layers, big globs of paint over top of it, or you could have globs of paint under, wait for it to dry and paint glazes over top. Acrylics mix really well. You can layer thick and thin acrylics over top of one another, which is a big difference between acrylic and oil paint. And I won't even get into, because in oil paint there's a real strict kind of rule about painting thick over thin, because you can have, or yeah, thick over, I always get, just saying it mixes me up, but if you do them in the wrong order, that's what causes the paint to crack. So if you're looking in museums, or it's one of the reasons, one of many reasons why the paint would crack. Okay, let me see. I want to do a little more. Oh, I was going to do the headdress. So I was going to mix a brighter color in here. So we're going to take our warm yellow and white and some glazing liquid here. And okay. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of warm. Let's do this over. Where have I got a spare plate? I'll take a little bit of the cool yellow. We haven't used any of that at all, because probably Vermeer had never even seen a color that bright in his whole life, except if he looked directly into the sun, right? It's such a bright color. Okay, so I've got the glaze on here, and I'm just trying to rub as much paint off and just go for the glazing liquid. So we'll see. It's hard the way that I've put the paint on there. Okay. So you see, I can even just brush right over other previous colors, right? Because it's so thin. This is basically what using the photocopy version would have been like. We can use the shadows from the photocopy that we've transferred onto the canvas, and then just paint right over top of them. Now obviously those darker areas have lost some of their intensity, and the contrast goes way down when we paint a brighter color like this over top of it. But we can always just put another glaze of the darker color over top. So that color is, I think that works actually quite nice. And you can see, just as I go back over some of these previous areas, it just gets brighter and brighter and brighter as I put more and more glaze over top of some areas. Okay. So now I'm going to put another, well, let's see. I could put this same color here, but it would be a little bit too cold. So I'm just going to warm it up. Looks like I got maybe a little too much. Let's put this over here. Yeah. I need my glazing liquid. So I think I'm just going to do this right there. Okay. Glaze also tends to dry, like it goes on often a little bit brighter and more saturated, and when it dries it tends to darken down a bit, which is something to kind of keep in mind. Right, so you see I'm kind of painting over certain areas. I don't mind if I do that. I can always, if I found, let's say, this area was too bright before, or too dark, a little light glaze over top, and boom, problem gone. Okay. So, I think with the face, I'm going to go in and... Actually, you know, I'm going to finish this with a little bit lighter area. Maybe, you know, I'm just going to do some highlights over a lot of the painting. So, you know, the thing about this class is, like, I would probably a couple of months ago would have just stopped here because it's like, oh, I feel like I've taught everybody the technique, everybody understands it, that's enough. And then, but as I paint these and we're getting more into more advanced ways of painting, I get really excited and I see the potential in this, and I think, gosh, if I put a little bit more time into this, I could pull this thing off and it's going to look, you know, it's not museum worthy, but if I put, let's say, another half hour, 45 minutes in here, we're going to have like a painting I can be really, really proud of. And rather than just being an art exercise, right? And that's sort of like what I tell my students at Emily Carr, the university I teach at. It's like, you got to make paintings that make you happy, not me, the teacher, happy, right? So if you get absorbed into the painting and you want to keep on working on it, that's a good thing, right? Because most other people are just like, yeah, okay, I got it, moving on, okay, whatever, what's next? I'm gonna go play video games or something. Okay. What's going on there? Okay. So I said I was going to put a little bit of highlights on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, if I have any skin tone-ish stuff left over, basically kind of a white and some glazing fluid. So it's a little bit of blue. Need more glaze. Okay. Let's just get a bunch of white there, and then just dilute it dramatically, get a little skin tone in here. It might be a little bit too thin. Get a little bit more white on there. Okay, and the only way to find out is by attacking the canvas a little bit. So let's see here if we start putting... I don't think that's bright enough. We need a little more white. got that in there, we can just kind of brush out some of those brush strokes and soften it up a bit. And then we can just, we want it brighter, we just go back over. So there's barely any white in this. This is a super transparent glaze. Right, wherever there's already white, it's going to get whiter. Wherever there isn't white, it'll make a very subtle impact. I'll lighten this area up just a little bit under her nose. So you know, just this brush that I'm using here is just a regular cheap brush that came in that set. After I use it, I just try to rub it on my clothes just to make sure I get the paint off, and that I'm not, that way I don't spread more paint elsewhere. Getting a little bit of this reflected light from her collar onto her face there. Very subtle little effect. Use the blow dryer. If you find you're starting to pull paint off like I did there, then it's still too wet, so I need to dry it off. So I'm just going to go back into this area that was still too wet and touch that up. Don't like the way that's drying in there. Driving me nuts. See this kind of spot that's formed? It's going to take a little bit of love to make that work. Okay, so to make that work, I'm going to have to get a little bit of flesh tone. A lot of white. So this is like paint without much of any glaze in there. So I'm just coming back in and touching up this area, which I kind of overworked a bit there. Just softening that up. Put some of the little highlights in the here. We don't need a lot of it. That feels pretty good. Let's do the lips. Let's take care of these lips here. Glazing liquid. Take a little bit more red than I would probably recommend using, just so I can work a little bit faster. Ordinarily it would be kind of nice just to build this up nice and slowly. Okay. going to blow dry that. We'll hit it with some darker colors here. Okay, so other things too, like I've kind of overworked the face a little bit with some of this white, and it's starting to kind of dull down. I could go do a very light glaze of the flesh tone over everything, even some of the shadow here, and to get a little bit more warmth back in there. And maybe I'll do that in a few minutes here, but I'm going to mix a darker color or actually I don't even really need to mix it. I've already got it kind of, just need a smaller brush. Okay. So again, this same color I used for the background. This is, you can see how it's still very wet, even though it's quite thin because of the glazing fluid. So I'm just going to add a lot more of that. Okay, and we're just going to keep on darkening some of these darker areas, like this shadow here. Take my brush and just soften that out if it's too dark. Let's say I want it to come into here a bit. Right, eventually we're just going to kind of obliterate the line between the shadow take this same dark color, come into behind the neck here, and even on her collar. Oops, my head is in the way, sorry. Take this same dark color and go back. It might be a little intense. Let's see. All right, just cleans it up a little bit. Going along this edge where it meets the black. I'm going to try and that to kind of disappear a bit. I guess I should look at the original here. I was like, what is the situation with this up here? I'm like, oh, well, I have the original I can look at. Sometimes I just get so absorbed into what I'm painting that I stop looking at the original and I have no idea what I'm painting anymore, so. All the answers are right in front of me, should I choose to look up from the painting and look at this original paint, Vermeer's version. So this area was once much darker and I lightened it up a while ago with a brighter color. I'll let that dry. Anything down here again? Can't overstate how helpful it is to have a little dry brush like this that you can go in and smooth things out with. Just really, I think, improves the whole process dramatically. Just gonna do a little bit of darkening here. You can see just this almost transparent glaze coming into it's just a little bit darker to fine-tune some of these folds on here. Folds are often one of the things people struggle with the most when it comes to painting and getting kind of nice smooth blending. So hopefully you should see how effective glazing is as to helping that process. it real quick. Keep on building up some darker areas here. Not sure what, there's got some neat little stripey things going on. Where's my smallest brush? Oh, it's in the water. Come in and darken the earring. Oops. Getting close. Obviously, I could spend a lot longer on this. Okay, quickly do a little bit of the modeling on the lips here. So the underside of the top lip is going to be a little bit darker. Just darkening those teeth a little bit helps. So I just need to go a lot darker in these eyes. Getting some paint that is pretty close to the darker color in the background. Just very delicately putting it in there. Pretty heavy-handed, Michael. Just gonna soften that up a bit. Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna blow dry that. Okay. I might blow dry this and do I want to put a light, warm, fleshy glaze over that because it's gotten so blue. I just keep on putting that same blue from before. I think I need some of the warmer color on here. So while that's just curing a little bit more, I'm going to put a little highlight on the lip. And then I think I'll call it a day just because I could paint on this for weeks and weeks, as Vermeer certainly did himself. That's been contaminated with blue, so a lot of blue contamination going on here. So some white. Let's put a little more on here. It's too much. Too much. Just need way more glaze. That's tricky. I might have to come back and put a bit of red to deepen that. Okay, do I want to do that? I think I do. I'm running out of space on my palette. So, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to mix that skin tone again. So I'm going to take some warm red, this warm yellow, mix that up. Take a little bit of the warm blue. Oops. Too much of that. And then some white. Okay, so I got this really nice color skin tone there. But I got, if I paint that right on there, it's just going to obliterate everything. It's too much. So I'm going to mix it into my glaze. Kind of got a little patch of glaze here. And even then, that's still a lot. So put a little more glaze on here. I'm just going to try to dry my brush off. And then I'm going to mix this again, mixing glaze into here. And then I can just sort of paint it over there, and you see how subtle that color is. So I'm just going to go over top of this painting. See how it's like really barely anything's changing? It's a very subtle application of that skin tone, which can go in and warm up part of the painting that I might have just kind of overdone here. And also simultaneously soften up any kind of areas which I may have kind of overpainted, or lines that were too dark. Okay, so let's hit it with the hairdryer. Right, we'll just go back over and we'll do this again. So there's a little bit more white that I put in here the second time around. Let's do another. I'm just going to get this on. We'll do one more application of this. And I think you should see, you know, quite a big difference. Also softened up that hard shadow on her face. Just want to make sure I still also have that color, this flesh tone elsewhere, so that we don't actually have the warmest part of her face in the shadow. So I'm just making sure I've evenly applied that. Okay, I feel like that made a big improvement, right? It's probably kind of hard to see now because of the transition over time. It was a little bit slow to get to this point, but that feels much better. I think what I want to do I want to add black? Another quick dark layer of black? I think I do. So let's just mix the same color. So I'm going to use some of this leftover. Oh, that's too black. I thought that was blue, but let's do this over here. The audio might have gone out there for just a second. My apologies. Okay, we're about 4 minutes from finishing up here. So, as I come down here, I'm going to blend in. So I've got, it's kind of a bit of a purpley quality to this color, which I actually really like. I think it contrasts really nicely with the yellow, purple being the opposite color on the color wheel from yellow. So brush, we'll just I think I'll need to just mixing a little extra glazing liquid in here to help facilitate this blending. So when you paint it over the white, you can really see how dark or not dark it is, up to you, however you see it. So okay, I feel folks were pretty much there. Yeah. I do want to add a little speck of white in those eyes as reflections, you know, on her pearl earring. Right, that pops. Oops. kind of missed some of the top half of this painting up here, didn't I? A little bit of a highlight or shadow right here. Oh, yeah, dragged some of this paint. Okay, I think I gotta call it a day. Not bad for, what, 3 hours worth of work there to recreate one of the great paintings of all time. Obviously, there we could spend hours and hours, weeks, literally working on this to really get some of the subtlety in. But the essential aspects of the painting have been completed, and I feel pretty happy with this for the amount of time that we spent on this painting. So, yeah, hopefully you have a pretty good grasp of how to use the glazing liquid, what it's for, how it can be really, really helpful, especially if you're a little bit more of a timid painter. It just really gives you so much more freedom to be able to add subtle variations of color from one to the other without having to worry about the urgency of blending colors, right? Because we basically did almost no blending on the canvas of paint. We applied layer after layer of thin colors, and therefore we were sort of just basically took a color and then softened it out until there wasn't any color left on the brush in that area, and it creates the illusion that two colors are blending together, even though you could have painted them weeks apart in terms of time, right? Okay, so last thing to do is to flip it over as carefully as possible and then to put our names on it. You could, of course, do this when the painting's dry. Some people do this before the painting's even begun, but I always wait until the painting is finished before I sign it. Okay, another one in the books, folks. So, if you've enjoyed today's class, I would love it if you were to share this with everybody you know. Put the link on your Facebook or your Twitter. I would love to see the painting that you made today. So please join the Facebook group and upload your photograph of this painting to the Facebook group and share it with all the other artists out there who, just like you, are trying to get better and better every single day. And of course, in a couple of, I think next Saturday, I'm going to do a episode where we're going to look at a bunch of the artworks that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. Your artworks that you guys have sent me. So that's a good incentive to finish your paintings and send them to me as quickly as possible. You could send them to the Facebook page or just to my regular Facebook page. The link again is down in the description. Instagram, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. And again, my website, you can find my email address there. And if you want to make a small or large contribution, there's the PayPal link below. And also, if you want to arrange to send me a check, which many people have done before, and I'm super grateful for that, I'd be happy to pass along my address to facilitate any kind of transfer of funds. Okay, folks, so thank you so much again for tuning in. This has been really fantastic to be able to work with you guys and to paint this very famous painting. And we've done it in a reasonable amount of time. Is it completely finished? No. But now that you know the skills, you could continue to work on it endlessly until it drives you absolutely bonkers. I will mention our next class, we're going to do a Takashi Murakami, totally different. One of the contemporary art's kind of most polarizing figures and beloved figures, Takashi Murakami, Japanese artist, the kind of proponent of the super flat movement. We'll talk about all that shortly. But next week, I'm going to suggest, or for next class, that you if you have some Mod Podge, that will work just as well. You can use this kind of Mod Podge, or this special Mod Podge, which is for transfer onto fabric. It's a little out of focus there. So you can use this. Why is that not? Looks still a little fuzzy. Anyway, you can use this to put an image onto an old T-shirt or a sweater, not like a zip-up hoodie sweater. You could put an image on that. I've done it onto jeans and backpacks, all that kind of stuff. This works really well. I actually got this at Michael's. I found they had the cheapest price on it, but who knows? Amazon. I'll put some links in the video description for that if you're interested in buying it. We are just going to make a regular painting on canvas using all of the simple materials you already have. So but if you are interested in making a T-shirt with a painting on it and transferring an image on it, then you can get some of this and you can print out the image that'll be on the Dropbox folder, and I'll show you how to do that in the next class. So maybe you want to get some of those materials and do it along with me, or if you want to just watch and figure out how to do it, because I'll show you a few different methods, and then who knows, maybe you'll start up your own Etsy business, printing or making your own T-shirts with your own logo or design on it. And obviously you can go and go to different places off the internet and they'll do it for you, but wouldn't it be neat for you to figure out how to do it all by yourself in your apartment, basement, studio, office, mountaintop, or wherever you are on planet Earth? Okay, so it is time for me to go, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of days for episode 41. We're getting closer to the end here, and I'll start teasing out the next series of videos that are going to be coming out in February, March. So stay tuned for that. See you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.